We're going to get started, and I know folks are probably going to come in a bit later as well. But welcome to this month's version of Voyage Fromage, or edition, I should say. Um, I'm Julia, the owner of Fromage Kitchen, and I'm going to be handing the presentation off to Yvonne. Yvonne is joining us from London today, and that is the theme of this month's cheese club is UK cheeses that we source through Neal's Yard Dairy. And so Yvonne is going to be giving a tour of the arches in London where a lot of these cheeses are aged, and she'll give oversight on kind of what that means and how they select and source the cheeses. So super happy. Thank you all for adjusting the timing so we could, handle the time zone change. And without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome and introduce Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you all for being such supporters of artisan cheese. I think someone once celebrated in 2018 that Britain now has more cheeses than France. Congratulations, we've won the battle. But that's such a misnomer because what that includes are all those industrially produced cheeses, which, as we know, aren't a reflection of the milk, the grass, the animals, or the land. Yes. And so what we try to do at Neal's Yard Dairy and what Formaggio Kitchen and the crew there are so good at is really trying to bridge that connection between you and the places where these products are made and the integrity in which they are made. Yeah. So while it may seem that we are in a great time right now of artisan cheese revival, the number of cheesemakers that are closing, the family farms, small producers that are closing day by day, year by year is still high. And so we fight the good fight. And so thank you so much for supporting us, cheesemakers, through the work that the crew at Formaggio are doing, and to you for being a subscriber to the Cheese Box. It is impactful. So thank you. Julia mentioned that I'm here in the Arches. And what does that mean? Well, in the background, you're going to hear the dunk, the dunk, the dunk, the dunk, and you've probably heard it already. And that's the sound of trains going overhead. So let me see if I can work the tech. Here we go, the dunk, the dunk. And you'll see that these bowed ceilings overhead are the underside of Victorian railway arches. So I'm underneath the main railway line from London to Dover, and the space above me is as long as the width of 8 trains. So that's a very bad way of saying that there are 8 train tracks running overhead. And that's the length of our maturing rooms. We like this space because the Victorian brickwork does a lot of the insulation work for us. It also gives us really high ceilings that are domed, which are important because the high ceilings help with airflow, gentle airflow. Yeah. But they also help to prevent condensation drips. Yeah. Just the way any condensation forms when it's coming off over arched roofs like that means that instead of droplets forming and falling onto our cheeses, they'll tend to roll down the sides instead. So these railway tunnels really suit us. And it means that when we moved into this current set of maturing rooms back in January 2018, we have twice the amount of space for cheese, and we're running on half of the energy cost, which for us is not important, not just important from a commercial perspective, but just from, for us to be environmentally responsible as well. Yep. It is a resource that we don't want to believe is limitless. So before I wax lyrical for far too long, we're going to taste our first cheese, which is actually Durris. So that is the little podgy wash rind cheese that you've got in your box. Yeah. And it is made in County Cork by Jeffa Gill and her daughter. One of the things I love about this cheese is it has it's neither semi-firm nor semi-soft. Yep. There's a podginess to it. And if you were to just smell the rind, what you end up, what the initial aroma that I have is sometimes of a well-oiled leather belt. And the first bite, my favorite batches of Durris are always the ones that remind me of peeling a clementine at Christmas. So have a bite. And initially, that the richness of that paste, that almost like my batch here has a little bit of an orange sherbet flavor to it. Yep. Something a little bit citrusy, a little clementine to this cheese. Really rich on that mouthfeel. A cheese that I eat copious amounts of over breakfast. And as Julia says in the chat, please, 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 I can't see the chat very well because I don't have my reading glasses on. So do jump in with any questions along the way, whether it's about the cheese that we're tasting or about the rooms that we're walking through. So this cheese is made in County Cork. Pre-Brexit, it was much easier for us to get it. Post-Brexit, with the Republic of Ireland part of the EU, and unfortunately the UK no longer part of the EU, this cheese is coming into us younger and younger because it takes longer and longer for it to get across the Irish Sea. And so when it finally arrives with us, we're going to give it a couple of washes. And what does washing cheese actually mean? If you look at this rind, one of the things you'll notice about it is that it's got these lovely striations, lots of different colors happening. That's telling you that there's something happening on the rind itself. That is a colony of different types of microbes, which are imparting different flavors and textures to these cheeses. And the act of washing a cheese simply reduces the acidity on the outside so that it encourages some microbes to populate and to thrive, and it discourages others who like a higher acidity environment. Yeah. The act of washing as well, and literally washing the cheese in a salt solution, a 2% salt solution, means that we're taking a cloth, or sometimes, depending on the age of the cheese, our hands, and rubbing the cheese. Yeah. Later on, we're going to see some examples of different wash rind cheeses as they're developing. And that abrasion also helps to remove some of the surface microbes that we may not want on that cheese, only because they just don't give us the flavors that they're looking for. Anyone have any questions about this cheese or anything that surprises them about it? What I've noticed is that oftentimes wash rind cheeses are ones that you would save to say to the end of a tasting, or you would expect a much stronger, more high volume flavors coming through. Durris for me is, as I said, it's my breakfast cheese of choice. It's a cheese that I can eat copious amounts of, especially on especially at Christmas. Something about that sort of clementine citrus notes to it that for me just screams Christmas morning. I don't know why. So enjoy the Durris. I'm going to take you around to what is our soft cheese corridor. So down this corridor, you might be able to see 5 different doors. Each of the rooms down this corridor has a different temperature and a different humidity setting. So as I walk you through the different rooms, some of them are pretty empty at the moment because we've just put the cheese to bed for the weekend. It's 5 p.m. here in London. And one of the examples of an empty room is this drying room here. And the drying room is important to us because it's an ability for us to remove moisture from cheeses. So you can see that, the target temperature in here is 10 to 12 degrees, and it is the drying room. So we want a low humidity in this room. You can see the humidity now is about 90.5%. It sounds pretty high, but for us in cheese world, it is pretty low because we want to be gently removing moisture from this cheese. Room 4, on the other hand, you can see here that it's got a target of 8%, 8 degrees. Yep, so this is Celsius. I'm going to be careful as I open this door because it needs more fixing. Oh, and the humidity here, as you can see, is 99.6. That's optimal for us for this room. And the
We might lose her a little bit because in the walk-in, basically these little caves act almost like a refrigerator, and you lose cell service in there. So we might lose them, Yvonne, for a little bit. But hopefully she'll pop back on soon. But just to give you a contrast with our caves, so we have a very different style of affinage than Neal's Yard at Formaggio Kitchen, in that we view our caves more as storage versus actual affinage. And affinage is the practice of aging cheese from a younger age. So what Neal's Yard does is they actually source cheeses when they are much, much younger, and they put them in the caves to be able to then ripen them to the proper state that the cheesemakers intended. For our purposes, we actually receive the cheeses ready to sell, essentially. And so it's a little bit different in that we're just trying to store them and maintain that optimal consistency that they're already at. I just got back from England, actually. I did 2 of the cheeses that we're tasting tonight, or today, I guess, are cheeses that I was able to visit the farms and help to select and meet the makers. And so, not Ireland, unfortunately, but we will be tasting the Tunworth a bit later as well. And that's one of the ones that I visited. And one thing that's exciting that we're going to see to club, in a few months from now, is I actually selected cheeses while I was there, specifically for the cheese club. So we are going to be enjoying some different UK cheeses. And my goal with that was to actually with Yvonne's help, bring some of these cheeses in a little bit younger. I talked with all the cheesemakers and really tried to assess what their goal was for these cheeses and at what age they wanted folks to enjoy them. And I think the really big challenge with that is that we have to deal when we're working with our European cheeses, cheeses from the EU, I should say, that is usually a transport about 3 to 4 weeks by boat to get over to the States. Whereas the cheeses from the UK often can take up to 6 weeks. And so it really impacts, the quality of the cheese. And so we're actually doing an experiment with Neal's Yard and Yvonne with this shipment, that you will all be sort of caretakers of this experiment, because when you have the cheese on the boat, it goes into stasis, because Yvonne is talking about aging these cheeses with really high humidity and, moderate temperature. So not really, really cold temperature. Whereas when it gets on the boat, it's very cold temperature, so below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and very little humidity. And so the concern, the great thing is that low temperature puts the cheese in stasis to a certain extent, so it kind of stops aging. But the negative is that it will start to dry out a bit. And so my intent with importing these cheeses a little younger is that we maintain and retain some of that high moisture that you get out of a young cheese, so that by the time it gets to us, and then we pop it right into our high humidity cave, which is about 95% humidity, then we are going to see a cheese that's more similar to what you would taste on the farm. And so that's the goal. That's the overarching goal of this experiment that I'm excited for all of you to be a part of. And so I saw that folks have started enjoying the Tunworth. So that was somewhere that I actually visited. So this was my first time going to the English countryside. So we went north. It's called the Northern Run. And I went with David Lockwood, who is one of the executives at Neal's Yard Dairy. And it was basically, he does that run once a month. And what he does during that run is actually work with the farmers and the cheesemakers to assess their cheeses and to make sure that they are kind of on track for the flavor profiles that they're looking for. But then they also select the cheeses, the batches that specifically will go to Neal's Yard Dairy, and then eventually might come to us. And so we visited Tunworth, and that was a really fun visit because that this cheese is a cheese in, I don't want to say a cheese in limbo, but a cheese that is adapting and progressing. So Tunworth used to be made in a much smaller vat, and the vat is where the milk is put and then the coagulation begins. The size of the vat, every aspect of cheese making has a pronounced effect on the final product. And you wouldn't necessarily think that the vat size would have such a pronounced impact on the flavor of the cheese, but it actually did. And so they wanted to produce more Tunworth, so they used a slightly larger vat, and all of a sudden the Tunworth started to change, and the flavor profile was different. And so David has been working with them for months on this flavor profile and getting back to the flavor that they're hoping for. And so Joyce, your comment saying that it's so mushroomy is so exciting, because that is the flavor that they have been really trying to get back to. So for a while there, the cheese became quite mild, still a beautiful cheese, nothing wrong with the cheese per se, but it wasn't the cheese that they wanted it to be. And the flavor profile of that sort of rich cabbagey quality and mushroomy and truffly that they are, I was very excited to taste them, because when we, sorry, I'm just telling them about going to Butler's. We lost you in the cave. But I'll just really quickly wrap up. And so when we tasted both old batches that were a bit milder, all the way up to these newer batches, which progressively got more and more like the flavor that you just talked about, Joyce, that mushroomy sort of truffly cabbagey flavor profile. And then the other exciting thing too, that I haven't tried yet, but I'm excited to, the King of England actually just visited the farm, and he mentioned to them that he loves enjoying Tunworth on his scrambled eggs. So yeah, it's not something I would have sort of thought to do, but now I'm excited to try it. But I will turn it back over to Yvonne.
The king enjoys Tunworth on his scrambled eggs.
That's what they said. Yes, that's what he said to them. They were shocked that he even was familiar with the cheese. They were so excited. And it was so funny because they don't advertise, like they don't put him on camera and use it as marketing by any means. It's just his way to connect to the farmers. But they were like, oh, I wish we could have gotten that on camera. But now I really want to try it because it's not intuitive choice, I think. But when you think about like truffle and eggs is the perfect combination. So like it does. Of
course it makes sense.
It makes sense. And so I'm really excited to try it.
You know I'm going to be doing that tonight, right?
I know, right? I know. You'll have to report back on that. I think the Tunworth has to be like a little bit melty and warm, and then it'll be perfect.
Yes. So. Okay. And gentle heat with your scrambled eggs anyway, so perfect for melting that Tunworth.
Yes.
I love that. I'm so sorry. Where did I lose you? I was waxing lyrical about ride formations.
Oh no. Right when you walked into the cave, we lost you.
Oh no. Okay, so you didn't see any of the soft cheese rooms.
We saw sort of it froze, and we saw a little bit of the outline of it, but I think the second we went inside, we lost service.
Okay, I am so sorry. I will send photos, and hopefully you'll be able to share them. Our wife, as I said, we've just moved back into our we've had some maintenance done, in the quiet period of the year. So I think our Wi-Fi is still a little bit patchy. So I'm so sorry about that. This is our first of our 2 hard cheese rooms. So you can see that we've still got some empty stillages as we're moving cheese around and trying to figure out where everything should live. Um, can you see these? Can I get a wave? Amazing. I can see you moving. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And so what we have here are, unlike the soft cheeses, which unfortunately, I'm so sorry you didn't get a chance to see. Um, the soft cheeses will come to us anywhere between 4 to 7 days old. And then we'll be growing a rind on them. Yeah. They'll live with us anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on the maturation time that's required. They'll all follow different maturation pathways as well. So depending on whether they're like, really wrinkly lactic geotrichum rinds, or they're more like the Durris, which has a lovely wash rind, that might live with us, for up to like, 6 to 8 weeks. It will depend from cheese to cheese. And that maturation pathway really determines which of the 5 temperature and humidity controlled rooms they will live in and for how long. So a cheese might go straight into the drying room for 24 hours, and then it'll come out and it'll go into the nursery, which is where we grow rinds. But if the rind is if the cheeses are feeling too wet, yep, and we're not seeing rinds developing the way we normally would for that style of cheese, then it might go back in the drying room for another 12 hours. And so if you think about these different pathways, almost as almost like, I don't know if you remember those like choose your own adventure books, where it says, if this is happening and you choose to do this, go to page 12. And if you don't want to follow the monster into the dark, scary cave and you instead want to sit on the beach and have a mimosa, then turn to page 6. Right. So that's that way of finding a maturation path for each of the different batches of our soft cheeses is what our cheese team here focuses on there. Yep. Making sure that, we're able to, to release those soft cheeses when they're at their best, depending on where they're going to travel to. So the Tunworth that you've just been enjoying will leave us super, super young because it's going to travel 6 weeks across the ocean. Dorston, which the crew at Formaggio have had, in the past, is a little lactic goat's cheese, and that will leave us at about 10 days old. So I mean, barely a baby. Yep. To on its 6 week voyage across the ocean. But in the UK, we might be releasing Dorston at about 4 weeks because we'll be keeping it at about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit instead of the 34 degrees that it's being kept at in a refrigerated container going across the ocean. Yeah. So all of those different transit times, way of transporting cheeses is also something that we're able to be able to respond to more flexibly if we're able to mature the cheeses ourselves. And that's why we mature soft cheeses here. The other thing about soft cheeses as well is that oftentimes, when cheesemakers are starting, they will build a facility that's big enough for what they think they need. Too little cheese in a room is not good because the cheese is the only source of moisture. And so too little cheese in a room means that it dries out. Too much cheese in a room not only increases the temperature of the room because of all the chemical energy that's happening, but it also means that you get poor airflow, yeah, between your racks, and it can also lead to uneven moisture loss because the air is just not circulating the way it ought to. And so at different times of the year, in order to help our cheesemakers, the ability for us to bring in our own batches of soft cheese to mature means that they're able to keep space, especially as you can imagine in the run up to those busier trading seasons. Yep. So they can make more cheese, turn more of that milk into cheese, into that value added product, and we can take the maturation responsibility off of their shoulders. It's a great way for us to be able to run experiments when cheesemakers are having issues with how, certain rind development, blooming, drying. Because we have a set of different temperature and humidity controlled rooms, we can try different pathways. Yep. So we might take a few wheels or a few units from a batch, treat them in 4 separate ways, and then give feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what are the characteristics of the cheeses given less time in drying, more time in drying, staying in the nursery, which is 14 degrees Celsius, for 2 weeks, staying in the nursery at 14 degrees for 1 week, etc., etc. And so that ability to experiment, to give feedback to our cheesemakers as well is important. Every maturing room, every set of maturing rooms has its own aroma and own characteristics. The one that's downstairs at the Fromage Huron has definitely its own character. Our maturing rooms have their own aroma, they have their own scent, they have their own impact. And our soft cheesemakers say that they always tell us that if you were to give them a blind taste test, they would be able to tell the cheeses that we mature versus the ones that they mature themselves. Yep. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because all of those, the concept of nurture versus nature. I mean, yes, the nature is in the cheese. The cheese is made of the milk that's made from a farm by the humans who live and who work in that creamery. But the nurture is something that we're doing as well. Yeah, and so all the work that we try to do on the maturation side is not to change the characteristics of the cheese, but to help that cheese express itself in the way that the cheesemaker wanted it to. I.e., we're trying to nurture those cheeses, yep, so that they are expressing what that cheesemaker wanted that cheese to be. I.e., staying true to the vision of the cheesemaker. If we ever start to treat cheeses differently, where we might take a cheese that has a bloomy rind, that like the Tunworth, and we might wash it to turn it into a wash rind cheese, a rind like the Durris. We will always ask permission of the cheesemaker. It is their product after all, and so at the end of the day, they have final say. In the hard cheese area, and I don't know whether you heard any of this, but we don't mature many hard cheeses here. There are a few that we do. They take a bit, that is Montgomery cheddar, absolutely. Well spotted, the Montgomery Bay. Instead of maturing hard cheeses, because we are still in central London, even though you can hear the trains going overhead, we travel to the cheesemakers once a month or once every 2 months, depending, where we'll taste through 1 or 2 months worth of production. And then we'll select the cheeses that we think are the most interesting. And Julia happened to accompany us on one of those recently. And I know is working on a great travelogue that hopefully will be released soon.
Yes. Sorry, I'm off video because I'm totally scarfing everything.
I love that.
I never get to eat during these, so it's very exciting. Yeah, so I explained a little bit before about the trip, and so two of the cheesemakers, the Butlers and the Sitchelton, were two visits that I made. But it's very hard to kind of brag about yourself, so I'm going to brag about Neal's Yard and what they do. And you'll see this in my travelogue, which Morgan will send out at some point in the next, week or two. But, we've done selection before at Fromaggio Kitchen, where you go and you select and you have a very particular flavor profile that you're looking for. What I found really astounding about this trip, the Northern Run, was it was about more than just selection. It was, first of all, it was friends seeing friends and welcoming them into their homes. It was nurturing. We stopped at a lot of new cheesemakers who we don't work with. Neal's Yard, in some cases doesn't work with yet, to see their progress of becoming new cheesemakers. And, there was a lot of mentorship and a lot of time taken, providing feedback and information and suggestions, all in a very, really caring way. Nothing that was like, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. I could really see kind of the nurturing of the next generation of cheesemakers in the UK, of, small production cheesemakers that we're looking for, not these, massive giants. And then beyond that, troubleshooting, even the existing producers that we work with who've made cheeses for so long, why is this batch like this? And how is this doing on the counter? And what are the cheesemongers saying? Because a lot of times these cheesemakers don't get that direct feedback to hear, like, what are the customers saying about the cheeses, and what are the cheesemongers saying about the cheeses? Were they excited about this particular batch? And if they were, why? Like, why did they sell so much of it? Why did it do so well? And I think that really helps the cheesemakers to better understand their own sort of goals with cheese making and the flavor profile that they want to kind of achieve. Because like Yvonne said before, every little tiny change that you make to cheese making has an incredibly impactful outcome And so cheese making is constantly just fine tuning and making these little adjustments, and eventually, over generations, maybe getting to where you want to be. But it was a really special trip. And I think that what Neal's Yard does and the time that they spend with these cheesemakers is astonishing, and really kind of flies under the radar of how important they are to sustaining UK cheesemaking. So
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for joining us on that trip, because it's not for the faint-hearted. There's a lot of cheese that's being eaten at very fast speed, and
it was,
during which you're expected to write down all of your sensory evaluation, not just the sensory evaluation of the cheese in front of you, but also prognosticating on how that cheese is going to develop over the next 2 months, 6 months, and in some cases 2 years, when it's ready to release. Because we taste these cheeses young. Some of them are exactly the days of the week determine what those cheeses are like. Absolutely. I mean, for us to be fortunate enough and privileged to be able to say, "Hey, Jamie, we really like the 28th of May, and we really like the 22nd of May." Yeah. But we're not the biggest fans of all the batches in between. Please, please, may we have the 22nd and the 28th. It's such a privilege and such an honor to be able to go in and select what we think are the most interesting and what we think that you will find the most interesting. It really comes from a position of trust. And as Julia says, that trust takes time to build over the years. We're not talking about finding the best cheese. Let me be clear. These cheeses are all delicious. What we're looking for are the cheeses that we feel are the most interesting, because they most closely um, uh, hew to the vision that the cheesemaker has for their cheese. Julia will have heard it, being asked time and time again of, cheesemakers, like young cheesemakers. When I say young, cheesemakers who are new in their journey, but it's really annoying for them, because whenever we spend time with them, the questions that every monger will ask them is like, "What is your vision for your cheese? Like, what do you want your cheese to be? What do you want it to taste like? What do you want it to be like?" And and that level of communication is so important, because if we know what they're aiming for, our role and our responsibility is to help them get there. Yeah. So that ability to walk into into a cheesemaker's cheese store, and to taste through a month's worth or 2 months worth of production, and say, "Wow, these batches here are really interesting. What happened?" Right? How did you get such amazing milkiness? What was that? What was those differences? Really hopes, we hope that helps them to hone their craft as much as it helps us to bring us enjoyment of those cheeses. So in front of me, I've got Duckett's Caerphilly. And why have I paused here in the cheddar section to taste Duckett's? I paused here because this cheese is also made by the crew at Westcombe, which is right in front of me. Yep. It is a shorter maturing cheese. And so Caerphilly traditionally comes from Wales. It's a cheese that in the past has been sold at about, 2 months old. We like these cheeses closer to about 3 to 4 months old, sometimes 6 months old, because what you have with a more aged Caerphilly is, hopefully you're seeing that in front of you as well, is you have like a tri texture. So you have the rind itself, then you have breakdown. You can see that cream line just underneath the rind. And then you have this friable paste that's quite curdy and quite milky that's coming through. So the way I would encourage you to taste your ducats is to cut a baton, like I've just done, cut that in half, and first have a little nibble of the curdy core. If you've eaten the entire piece, that's okay. I think Julia's busy scarfing hers down. Quite open, quite friable in texture. Have a taste of the breakdown. Really smooth, really lactic, quite rich in terms of the mouthfeel for the batch I have in front of me, and then have a nibble of the rind. So we've just tasted through, yogurt, in my case, cream line, almost like like the full fat, unhomogenized milk when you get the that cream line right at the top. That's exactly what my breakdown tasted like. And then I've got lots of button mushroom in the rind. And then what I would encourage you to do with the other half here is then to try all three textures together.
Yvonne, do you have our number one question?
Mhm.
Do cave tours at the shop or, tastings and classes is, can I eat the rind? That's probably the number one. I'd love to know. I mean, I think everybody has their threshold for rind enjoyment. And I always say, if you think it enhances the flavor of the cheese, by all means, but I'd love to know what your take is. Something like this, where it's a very intentional rind. And, I see this rind as part of the cheese. But, I've also seen cheesemakers in the Savoie cut the rind off, which, I'm always like, wow. So yeah, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that.
I think it's really simple. There are two rules for me. Well, three rules for me for eating the rinds. Is it edible? So sometimes you have a wax coated rind. Please don't eat that. I mean, I'm sure you can. It's food safe wax, but please don't eat that. Number two, will it break my teeth? So Parmigiano Reggiano, great example. Cooking with that rind, so much flavor. Will it break my teeth if I bite on it? Probably. And as you say, Julia, the third and most important rule is: do I like the flavor, and does it add to the cheese? Yeah. So with this piece of ducats, just looking at the rind that's in front of me here, it's not an obvious case that this rind is going to be delicious. Yeah. And so, as I said, when we were breaking, when we were tasting the three components of this cheese, is just have a little nibble. Yeah. Have a little nibble of it. And if for you it is delicious, yeah, and if you feel it's going to add something to the cheese, then please, please do enjoy it with the rind. Yeah. I think when we're looking at, the ducats, there's an obvious, you can see how that cheese matures. Yep. You can see it visually in terms of the different colors and textures. You would have seen it in the Tunworth as well. Yep. Just in terms of how that flavor develops and how, the gooiness just underneath the rind is just that little bit gooier than right in the core of that cheese. Yep. But we also forget that even with these larger wheels of cheddar, where their diameters are, this is about 18 inches across. Yep. That you can also taste that maturation. You can also taste that difference between the nose to the rind. And I would always, always encourage you to always just have a little nibble, so long as it's edible, i.e. not food grade wax. Two, it's not going to break your teeth like a Parmigiano Reggiano. Because there's something that rind is going to tell you about the environment in which it was matured. Yeah. So the next time you're in a fromager shop, if you take a look at the rind on a wheel of Monty's versus a wheel of Harvard, they look like two different styles of cheese. Yeah. Even though they're both cheddars, but it tells you something about the room in which they are being matured. Yeah. And you can taste that on the rind. And so if we're looking to understand the cheese and to enjoy the cheese, the rind is part of its identity. Absolutely. It's an integral part of that cheese. It's where that interplay of oxygen is occurring. When we go on the selection runs, especially to Cheddar World, but you would have noticed this when you were at the Clark's with Spark and Hoe Red Leicester, whenever you leave, especially when you're going to select Monty's, and especially when you're going to select Westcombe, those two are the most virulent. I need to wash my hair immediately when I get home. Otherwise, anything that my hair touches will smell of their cheese stores for weeks. Yeah. The jacket goes into the wash. Yeah. Because and yet that is what that environment in the cheese store in the cave is what's helping determine what is growing on the outside of these cheeses. So if I show you Monty's, and if you look at the way the rinds develop on Monty's, the way the colors and the striations that are here on a Montgomery's cheddar. And if I go over to Pitchfork, sorry, Poacher, Lincolnshire Poacher, and you can see that this is much more of a, it's much more of a, almost like a leopard print to the rind. Yeah, that's telling you something very different about these two cheeses. Yeah, you're going to already expect either a flavor or textural difference between those two. Does that answer the question? I probably went on a bit longer than I should have.
No, I think that's awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure. What does the breakdown of your ducats look like mine?
Joyce, you're gonna have to share yours because I ate mine already.
Oh, I love that.
I was so hungry. I'm sorry. All
I
my cheese.
love that. Oh, great. That looks beautiful, huh? That wheel has traveled really, really well. That's wonderful to see. I think it's interesting because I think some people sometimes they look at a ducat, so they look at like a wheel of Baron, by God, when it still has a chalky core, and they're like, oh, this cheese isn't fully mature. It's like actually that tri texture, that's exactly what the cheesemaker wants. This is what this cheese is about. A lot of the Cafilis that are sold when they are released, when they are just they're rindeless, they've lived they've been matured in plastic. Yep. And you don't see that complexity. You don't see that breakdown. But you know what? It's more, it's easier to manage. It is more subtle. Absolutely. It's more subtle than the other cheeses. Milky, long. Yeah. I think oftentimes we conflate volume with complexity. Yeah. Volume is really how strong that cheese is, what that initial impact is. Complexity is how many layers of flavor, how many words we're using to describe flavor and texture. And so with the ducats, as you say, it's a more subtle cheese than the others. But what you're getting there is not only the difference in the textures, but you're also getting those corresponding differences in flavor. Everything from my piece, from like fresh milk to cream top to button mushrooms. And then once you have a bite that encompasses all of them, it just brings it to life. My favorite batches of Ducats Cafili taste like cream of mushroom soup with creme fraiche. Right, so we are now in, oops, how many of you lose me? I'm just keep moving. Okay, I can see you, fabulous, I haven't lost you. This is our second hard cheese arch. And here you'll see a different set of cheeses. They tend to be a little bit smaller than what we saw with the cheddars. Yep. Some of them are wrapped in paper because they require just a little bit more humidity. And the reason why the cheeses in here tend to be a little bit smaller or they tend to be blues is because this arch has 0 refrigeration. So it is unlike the other arch where you would have seen a sock that runs along the ceiling. And that's a way of us being able to channel the refrigerated air along the length of the arch without a draft. This arch does not have any, so it's reliant on overflow refrigeration from its neighbors. But as a result of that, it is also a couple of degrees warmer. Yep. So you would tend to see smaller wheels, yes, which require a little bit warmer, and blue cheeses, which are much happier when it's just a couple of degrees warmer. Yeah, it is those subtle differences, as Julia mentioned before, that make all the difference. Yeah, 2 degrees here and there Celsius. It means that for a cheese like Stichelton, juiciness, that's yeah. So the last cheese we're going to taste is lost my cheese.
Yeah, I think we're losing you a bit. I think we're out of a good Wi-Fi spot.
Oh no. Okay. Let me move. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better now.
Okay. I'm going to stand out here. How's this? Even better?
This is, yeah, much better.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I did an adequate Wi-Fi check just now. This is Stichelton. This is a raw milk blue cheese made in the Stilton style. Cannot be called Stilton because it is made of raw milk. So even though PDOs are meant to protect traditional methods, yep, Stilton, according to its PDO, must be pasteurized, which is clearly a modern invention. Yeah. Stichelton is made by an American who learned how to make Turkish cheese taught to him by a Greek man in Holland. So it kind of makes sense that Joe makes raw milk Stilton. We can't call it Stilton because the Stilton Cheesemakers Association will come after us, but we can refer to it as a British historic, a traditional British style of cheese. I'm going to ask you to dissect this cheese with me. And the first thing we're going to do is just have a little nibble of the paste, just the white close to the nose. And then a little nibble of the white paste just underneath the rind. No blue, just the white paste. Notice any differences in texture or flavor. Yep. Then have a little nibble of the paste that's next to the blue, but not the blue itself. And then finally, have a nibble of the blue. And then have a nibble. And just like the way we could see that visual difference of how that cheese is maturing with the Caerphilly, and in certain cases, certain times with the Tonworth. With the Stichelton, you should also be experiencing that difference in texture from underneath the rind towards the nose. Yep. For my piece, it was much fudgier underneath the rind. It was more of an open texture, more crumbly towards the nose. Yep. And then right next to the blue, not only was it the smooth richness to it, but it was also the sweetest part of the paste for me. Yeah. Towards the nose, there was in my piece, there was almost more yogurtiness to it, almost similar to the core of that ducats that we had just tasted, the ducats Caerphilly, that friable middle. Yeah. Underneath the rind, I had more farminess coming through. Yep. But both of those flavors, I would say, tended more savory. Yes. But that paste, that white that was just next to the blue in the middle, was very fruity. Yeah. Super fruity in mine. I don't know what the piece in front of you, whether you have those same differences for the wheel that's in front of you. But just know that the same way that the ducats and all those cheeses that we talked about before, they mature from outside in. Yep. What happens with a cheese like Stichelton or like with Tolson Bassett Stilton is that the blue actually matures it develops from the inside and then moves its way out towards the rind. So the next time you're in one of the fromaggio shops, ask to see like a halved wheel of Stilton or Stichelton. And what you should see there is almost like a spider web pattern that's happening. Yep. Where the blue is starting from the middle and then starting to spider web its way out towards the rind. And as the blue is maturing from inside out, it's breaking down the fats and the proteins. And it is, creating different flavors and textures, which is why that paste right next to the blue, even if you try it closer to the rind, try it closer to the nose, will always taste and feel different to a part of the paste that's not next to the blue. Yeah. The blues tend to bring out more of those boozy, fruity flavors. And that secondary fermentation, that secondary breakdown, means that it's always going to be that little bit softer next to the blue. The other thing to evaluate when you're tasting a blue cheese is, is what's the texture of the blue veins themselves like? Yeah. The blue should, we when we're talking about blue cheeses, we often talk about the bitterness of youth. And that's simply because the blue veins, the Penicillin roqueforti, or in this case, the Penicillin glaucum, when they're in their teenage years or their teenage time, there is almost like an undercooked spinach bitterness to them. Yeah. And as the cheese matures, it moves past that. Yeah. As the blue is developing, as the blue comes into its own, you move past that undercooked spinach. Yeah. And the blue itself is smooth, right? You might get a little bit of sand, but there should be no grit Yep. Once you get those big grit particles in the blue, that's oftentimes a blue that's a little bit overdeveloped. Yep. And that's when you end up getting like the peppery notes, almost like the wasabi up the nose. Yep. Your arugula flavors, those notes where you can feel it in your nose, the wasabi, the pepper, it's almost like you want to sneeze, at least for me. And I do sneeze quite a lot. Um, and so when you're thinking about blue cheeses, and I know a lot of people will come into our shops and say, I love all cheese, but I hate blue. Or I love all cheese, but I can't stand Stilton. And then one of my favorite things to do is to hand them a piece of either Colson Bassett or Stilton. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's so delicious. What is that? Because I think a lot of people have blue trauma. Yeah. A lot of times our first introductions to blue cheese is either in blue cheese dressing, blue cheese crumble. Yeah. Um, or, one of the quickest and fastest way to get a blue cheese to market is to pierce it young and pierce it often, because blue requires oxygen to bloom. Yep. And so if you're piercing it young and you're piercing it often, you're relying on that blue, on the flavor of the blue, and you have no flavor in the underlying paste itself. So allowing the cheeses to mature, in this case for Stilton, about 7 to 8 weeks before its first piercing, means that you get the complexity of the white, the complexity of the paste, and then the blue veins, they perform a function. That secondary fermentation, that secondary breakdown releases those fruity notes. It gives you those rich silk-like tones on your tongue. Yeah. But what you are not supposed to have is the taste of the blue dominating. So we talk about Stilton, we talk about Colson Bassett Stilton, and we talk about Spark and Ho Blue. What we're looking for is the blue veins to perform a function and not to be the flavor. Yeah. So I'm glad that there's no one on this call that is blue averse or has suffered from blue trauma. Amazing. Any other questions that I can help with to demystify British cheeses?
I actually have a question, Yvonne. Earlier you talked about the importance of timing of the age of the cheeses, especially that are coming to us. And something I've always been curious about is the specific care, transportation method, and timing of the baby cheeses from the maker to you guys, and like what goes into that. Because I imagine they're very delicate.
They absolutely are. So, oftentimes when it's usually the soft cheeses, or you might have seen some glimpses of like naked hard cheeses as well. When I say naked, there's no cheese on it. There's no rind on it. They need to be sturdy enough that they can travel. So if they're newborns, they just don't travel well. They're far too fragile. They don't want to be moved. And even though the cheeses, when they come in at about 4 days old or 7 days old to us, sometimes 10 days old, depending on the cheese, you might not visually be able to see a rind. It'll look like white styrofoam in most cases. Yep. But yet what's happening on the outside is that there's already a base coat that means that cheese can travel. So for some of the, the wrinkly, geotrichum goats and cows, goat's milk cheese especially, or sometimes the sheep's milk, you see like a pink yeast, almost like a little pink stickiness on the outside, which is the yeast that forms before the geo does. Yeah. And so it's almost like understanding the layers that are building on those rinds as you go through time. Yeah. So some of the wrinkly geo cheeses that we have, those geolactic cheeses that we have, some of them will have, will have a maturation pathway that has greater yeast development first, and others will have very little yeast development. So when I say it's like 4 to 7 to 10 to sometimes 14 days, it really depends on the cheese. Some cheeses, like, they won't release to us. We might ask and beg, but they just absolutely won't. Billy Kevin is notorious for that. He makes the Colson Bassett Stilton. As much as I might say that hey, Billy, I need to definitely get some cheeses because we need them for Christmas. He will put his foot down and say, absolutely not, Yvonne, they're not ready yet. And I refuse to let cheese out of my stores before they're ready. I understand. It doesn't mean that I'm not frustrated.
Thank you.
When our cheeses arrive in the US or in any of our export markets, they're accompanied by these green pillows. So they're inflatable cushions that we pump up with air, and then we use them just to provide a little bit of a cushion for the hard cheeses. So in case that container or that pallet gets jerked, it doesn't. It's just a little bit of padding for those. If you ever get a chance to burst one of those open and take a whiff, that's exactly what our maturing arches smell like. The best phrase I heard for that, it's airware. So the next time someone's unboxing a delivery of Neal's Yard Dairy, hold on to the air pillows and then just like pop them and then give it a little inhale. That's exactly what our maturing arches smell like. Amazing. And I have to say that ginger snaps and pear compote with that Stitchelton is making me really, really hungry. What a great pairing. Fabulous. Well,
Awesome. Well,
I
was just gonna say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us from London. And gosh, what time is it there now? 6?
6. Yes.
6 o'clock. So thank you. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. It makes a huge difference being able to see and hear, your perspective of what's going on. But we all really, really do appreciate it. So thank you so much.
And thank you for continuing to support our cheesemakers. It is it's not a given that British cheesemaking will continue to be around for much longer. So being able to really rally around these smaller farmhouse cheesemakers is so important, and to find that they have an audience and a support group across the ocean still sends so many of them into paroxysms of giggles. Like they just can't believe that their cheese is being enjoyed in the US.
I love it so much. I find cheesemakers, some of the best cheesemakers that we look up to as superstars and celebrities are so humble and modest when it comes to their cheeses. But so we're very, very excited. But I want to use this opportunity to tell you what's coming up on our docket for the next 2 months. So next month, we're going to be focusing on Canadian cheeses. We've definitely expanded our selection of Canadian cheeses. So we're going to do a little bit of a tour of Canada. And then in June, I'm excited to take you back to England, and we're going to do territorials. So yeah, Yvonne this is her first time hearing. Surprise.
Oh my gosh.
So we're very excited to do that. We're going to actually be able to provide the selection from Kirkham's that I was able to do when I was up there. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. It's going to be super fun. And then we're all going to be able to give Yvonne feedback on these cheeses. And that's a really fun sort of part of this experience, is that communication and feedback loop. So you're all in this with me.
You are all in it with you. I always say I'm going to ask you all to work very, very hard for me. Yes. I need you to be helping me evaluate the cheese in front of you, because otherwise that feedback loop to the cheesemaker is just not complete without you.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you, Yvonne. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you next month.